Hello everyone, welcome to week three's video. It is Memorial Day, so sorry it's a little bit late. Had some activities I didn't, as all of you do. We have family that come in off and on, and last night was one of those times. So anyway, this morning, Monday morning, Memorial Day. So what I want to talk about first of all, we'll talk about the intro to this week. We're covering two chapters. The family module is a portion of the discussion board that you'll need to do. It's on transitioncoalition.org, and I'll explain that a little bit more detail later. Also posting on your discussion on your sites for your observations. You'll need to go ahead and get that taken care of this week too. So post where you're going, what school you're going to, what teachers you might be going to, things like that. Sorry about that. I'm retrieving a password for the Transition Coalition so I can get that on there. So anyway, review of last week's accomplishments. It looked like many of you got the quizzes completed on time. You also were able to complete the discussion boards. There were, since it is Memorial Day and I'm feeling giving today, I am going to give those that need a few more minutes to go ahead and get discussion boards completed. There's a couple of you that haven't done your discussion boards yet. Go ahead and get that done today. I will be grading throughout the morning, but as I said, I have family in too, so I'll be grading off and on to get that on too. So go ahead and get that taken care of, and that way, and if you're already completed, then go straight into this week. But I want to talk a little bit about last week. I'll always take a little bit of time to talk about some items that came up in the discussion board, and any ideas that I think might be good to mention. So make sure you're keeping up the course schedule. I realize these first 3 weeks are horrendous, and I apologize. That's just the way it is. I'm trying to get it so that sometime throughout the semester we would have had to have weeks that had multiple chapters, and so what I've tried to do is create the best possible success for you in getting some of these classes done, some of these chapters done early, and give you some time as we get into some of the big chapters where you don't have extra chapters or extra things to do. So buckle up this week. We've got one last big one, and then you'll have several weeks of just one chapter to get done. So let's go ahead and start talking about last week's. Let's see here. Go up here in my notes. Many of you will be working with students that have deficits in math, reading, writing, several different skills. If you're going to be teaching these areas, whether it be elementary school where they're going to have more focus on math, reading, and writing, you'll be working with the students that have special needs. And also, if you're in high school, middle school, if you're working with, if you're a history teacher or looking at being a history teacher, guess what? Reading is going to be the primary thing your students are going to have to do, and also writing, maybe not as much math. If you're a science teacher, plenty of reading going on in science, but you also have math. For instance, in high school, they have to take physical science as part of requirements for graduation. So guess what? You're going to be having some special ed students that may have difficulties in math, which may affect what you're doing. Sorry about that background noise. So you'll need to know that you'll be working with students with those areas. You'll need to know what their deficits are and how you can work better with them. Several of you, as you were talking about your inclusion and your classroom, I got the idea, kind of reading in between the lines, that some of you felt like it wasn't the teacher's responsibility to teach these students. That if they're special ed students, they need to be in those classrooms with special ed teachers. Well, in some students, yes. Many of you understood that it's not an all or nothing dilemma. With inclusion, it is each individual student. But with that comes the knowledge that yes, you will have to teach students with special needs in your classroom. And so it is your responsibility. Just like if your subject is science, then guess what? The teacher, the administration has hired you to teach science, and you're going to have to make sure that you have all of the information needed to teach students science. But in addition to that, you're going to need to have all the information to teach students with disabilities. Part of that, though, I don't want you to get concerned and oops, I don't want to be a teacher now. No, that's not the deal. You have several resources in that special ed department that can help you. There are case managers that work specifically with that student and may have known that student if you're at the high school level for 2 or 3 years by the time you get to them. Middle school, again, maybe a couple years you've had that student, and in elementary, depending on how many grade levels are in that school, again, you may have a case manager that's very knowledgeable in that student. You may have behavioral specialists that work with all students in the district that can give you some pointers for those students that might have some behavior issues that you'd like to get over. But in addition to that, you may have paras in the classroom. Now, I do want to talk about paras in the classroom a little bit. Being a past process coordinator, I know firsthand it's very difficult. When you have special education students that are being included in the classroom, to put a para with every student. And to be realistic, every student does not need a paraprofessional in the classroom. Typically, what I would try to do is, we have many students in the high school level that needed to take personal math, personal finance. And so what I would do is I would work heavily with the counselor and try to have 3 or 4 students with special needs in that math class when they took personal finance. It's difficult for typical students to take. And so especially those students that may have some special needs, it can be difficult. So what I would do is make sure that I had a paraprofessional in that classroom that was very versed in personal finance, and make sure that they had the assistance. That teacher then would have an extra person in the room. Now, granted, at high school level, the paraprofessional is in there primarily for the students with special needs, so that is her primary focus. But how that teacher and that para break up those students, there may be a student that is not a special needs student that might benefit from having that extra help. It all depends on how the school wants to use their paras. But again, we don't have an unlimited amount of money that we can just have paras one-on-one with every student. And I hope as you get through this class, you realize too that it's not appropriate for students to have a paraprofessional one-on-one. I look at students that are in our Thrive program, and one of the primary difficulties that we have are with students that have had a paraprofessional with them 100% of the time, all 12 years of school, and then come to the college and they expect to have a paraprofessional with them there. It's not going to happen. We don't have a paraprofessional with students with special needs at the college level. Think about work. You're not going to see a paraprofessional typically working with a student one-on-one in a working environment. That's what that student is getting paid for. So we need to, what we always talked about at the high school level and even middle school a little bit, is weaning them away from para support when they can. Now, I'm not saying all students need to be weaned away, but I think many students that we have at in the schools do not need paraprofessionals one-on-one 100% of the day as they progress through their education. So that's another part. The other part about resources is the IEP. The IEP meeting is the best beneficial way that I can think of that a general education teacher or even a specials teacher, those teachers that are teaching music, art, PE, you need to go to those IEP meetings. And I know you have tons of things on your workload and things that you need to do, and then all of a sudden you get this letter inviting you to an IEP meeting. But make it a priority. Those are the best things that you can do, is go to those IEP meetings, hear what others have said about the student, find what their strengths are. We constantly are looking at, if they're on an IEP, they have some weaknesses. That's just a given. But many of the students that are on an IEP are not weak in every single area. They may be very strong in math, but just have a difficulty in reading. Or they may be great in reading, but have difficulty in writing. You don't know that. So make sure that when you get your list of students and one of them says it's on an IEP, that you don't just assume that everything you do in that class is going to have to be modified or is going to have to be accommodated or you're going to have a different way of doing things. Yes, you may have to have a different way of doing things, but you may find out that that student is actually an autistic student and they are great in science. I mean, everything that you say will go right into their head and they will have an A on every test that you do that is more about comprehension. What a great student to have in class in your science. Now, in history, that student may have a little more difficulty. But then again, you may have a student that has a great love for reading and love for history, and that may be the A student in your class, but they do have an IEP. So don't just think of an IEP as a student that has difficulty with everything. Think of an IEP just like any other student in your class. Students that have strengths and weaknesses. And just like any other student, you're going to work towards their strengths and try to help their weaknesses, just like any other student. But you will have them in your classroom. If you have art, PE, music, regular education, you're going to have a student with an IEP in your classroom. And just like any other student, you need to make sure that you're thinking about them as you're doing your lesson plans. And you're doing as much as you can to help them. Let me go through my notes real quick because I I write some notes, but then I don't always go straight through them. So let me take a few seconds. I know one other item that I saw in some of the posts. It seemed like some of you were on the thing about teaching students the same. Well, I'll give you an idea. You can't teach all students the same. You have students that are great auditory learners. You have students that are great kinesthetic learners. You have students that are great visual learners. You have to find that out. That's part of teaching, part of learning. And in a classroom, I may teach when I taught a little bit in 4th and 5th grade and middle school. You tend to try to catch several of those different learning styles throughout your day. You don't just teach all PowerPoint and do that. No, you want to do some PowerPoint, yes, or some things like that. But you also want to do some hands-on learning. You want to do some, group work. You want to do different things to help different people in different ways. So don't think that you just teach one way and you get all of them. That's not going to be the case. Let's see here. Let's see here. I just wanted to give you a talk now about placement. Placement tends to be, as far as a technical term, it's whether the student is 80% to 100% in the regular classroom, 40 to 79% in the regular classroom, or whether it's less than 39% in the classroom. And then there's some other ones in there too, but that is all discussed in the IEP meeting. That is all based around the student's strengths and weaknesses. If the student can be in primarily regular education classes with a little bit of help, whether it's a co-teaching class or maybe there's a classroom that has three or four students that would benefit from a paraprofessional kind of keeping them focused and helping them, and then maybe those students having maybe a 30-minute 45-minute session later on in the day where they can get help on any of the classes that they had that were out of the special education classroom, then that's fine. But again, it all depends on the student's strengths and weaknesses, and each individual is going to be different. That's primarily why in schools what I would do is for students in elementary, we would have a session where the new special education teachers that were going to gain students from transition from one school to the other, there would be a day that we would get together and we would have the case manager that has them now talk to the case manager that's going to have them next year and discuss what their strengths and weaknesses are, and kind of give the next case manager bump up over the summer to learn about what students are going to get. Some of the other items I did in the high school level is students that are autistic and students that were maybe ED. Sorry. ED, we would talk to those teachers. We would have sessions during those first few days, and I know as a teacher, those first few days, you want to get your stuff done. You want to get your paperwork ready. You want to do all of those things, but you have to make time for those students, and this is the best thing you can do. What I would do is spend about 15 minutes per student, and we would go through them. I would have the behavioral specialist or the autism specialist with me, and we would go through each of these students, and I would invite all the students, teachers that were going to have them the next year with them, and we would discuss student strengths and weaknesses, what things you could do to assist the student, anything like that, and answer any questions. And I know 15 minutes is short, but I also felt like 15 minutes well spent. And then from what I understood from teachers, they also felt the same way. And then as they went, then they would go ahead and take care of, as they went, then they knew who to come back and talk to. You know, if they had a student with autism, then they would come back and they would be able to know who they needed to talk to about that student. So there's all sorts of resources. You just need to take the time. And yes, it may need to be a little extra time at the beginning and some in the middle, but you're going to do that to all students. So let's see here. Another part of the para situation that I wanted to mention, I mentioned it a couple of years, and I told you I'd let everybody know kind of how it came out. Talking about students that where you're feeling like you're assisting them, but as they grow older, you may need to adjust how you're really helping them and maybe how you're really hurting them in the future. Okay, so let's take, for instance, I had some students at the high school level. There were students that had autism that had difficulty with crowds and difficulty with noises. So what teachers felt in the past was, hey, we just will not have that student go to the auditorium for the assembly. We'll just have another room that they can go to, and they can do homework or they can read, and they don't have to worry about the crowd and the large noises. Now, while that's fine, you know, maybe it kept that student from having a meltdown or a breakdown at that particular point in time. But is that the best thing for the student as they grow up and as they go into the high school level? Well, as a past employer and as a person working on transition, when I went to the high school, this was one of the first things that I said, whoa, wait a second here. What are we setting the student up for? They're getting ready to, we've got 4 years left with that student is how I looked at it when I came to the high school. And they come in as a freshman, we have 4 years left. And so we discussed some things. You know, is this best for the student? You know, they're going to have to get a job. They're going to have jobs that may have, and again, crowds is very relative. You know, is that 12? Is that 50? Is that 100? Is that more? But you can't distinguish that at a high school level. So what we did is we talked about that, and they understood too that no, we were actually not helping that student at that age, still not able to go to assemblies, and giving them kind of an out to just a teachable moment for that student. And so what we eventually did is we just came upon a plan where, yes, we gradually weaned that student away from being in a teacher's classroom during that assembly time and gradually worked that student where they, by their senior year, junior year, they were starting to be maybe in the room, in the gymnasium, maybe not sitting with the students. Maybe they were standing up with the principals. And then gradually work them into where they were sitting with the students, but in an area that, you know, they didn't feel, they felt like there was an out if they did need it. So make sure that you adjust. Do not just copy an IEP year after year. I've seen so many IEPs where they basically, you could have just photocopied it 1 year to the next. Each student changes 1 year to the next. At least they should. Maybe a little bit, but they will change year to year. Let's go ahead. I know I can talk a little more on that, but that gives you a basic idea. If you have further questions, don't hesitate to email me on that, especially those teachers out there that may tend to disagree. Or you can put it on the FAQ, and I can try to do some general ideas at that point too. Review items for this week. This week you have plenty on your plate. You have not only the discussions for chapter 3 and 9, but your post for the observation side. I'd like to start getting those in. Many of you have sent me ideas. I'm trying to work with some of you in getting those in. So I think many of you are really, really close. So go ahead and get those in. If this week by Wednesday or so you still don't have school, then definitely get with me. We're at that point. We need to get you figured out really, really quick. And go from there. If you've got a school, you just don't have teachers, not necessarily a big deal. I will give full points for this posting later on. I just want to make sure that everybody knows how important it is to get it going. So get those posts done. For chapter 3, I do think this is one of the most important classes. When I have face-to-face classes, this to me is the primary thing you have to have, is that parent involvement. I know you're the educator, and they will also feel like you're the educator and you should be the expert, but guess what? They're the expert on the kids. They're the expert on their son or daughter, and you need to make sure and take that expertise. And you may think that you know best, but after years of experience, yes, we know the book, we know what it says, but the real life, the real world out there is not right out of the book. There's always going to be changes. So make sure and keep that in there. So with that being said, I want you to really feel and look at that collaboration and support from parents and learn ways that you can do better in that. I know this is something I'm going to throw in there anyway. My first year at a middle school setting, I was at a middle school, self-contained, at that point BD, behavioral disordered students. And so many of those parents were used to getting phone calls from the school. Well, I wanted to change some of that a little bit. I realized this early on that was the first thing. We had a student I thought did very, very well, and I called the parent, and the first thing out of their mouth was, "What did Jenny do now?" or "What did Johnny do now?" That was the first thing. And many times I had to leave a message those first few times, and I didn't like this. I wanted to get that the atmosphere and the collaborative part into it. So what I did was the little red grading book, which many schools still use, I didn't use as much for grades. I had another way that I kept grades, but I used it for parent contacts. I tried to make sure that every month, and I know that may seem like, okay, every month, that isn't much. Well, for these parents, just once a month was a big deal. I made sure that every parent, every student, I called the parents at least once a month on a good thing that they did. So I would look at my deal and I broke it down, and I had each child, and I made sure that I looked. And it may have been the student had all of their homework turned in that day. Or maybe the student just had one homework assignment done that day, where before they didn't have any done. Anything at all that I could find was a positive, I called home. And I called until I got somebody. In the first month and a half, I continued to get, what did they do now? What did Johnny do now? I mean, that was always the answer. But guess what? After about 3 months, 2 months, 3 months, it wasn't that way. And the parents, I saw a change in attitude towards the school. I saw a change in attitude towards their own son or daughter. Because they were seeing that there were some good things that were going on. That also helped me when there were some bad things going on. I wasn't the person that always called when there was something bad. And so by creating this collaborative partnership with them, I felt like it was much better for the student and the family. I feel like probably the family environment changed probably pretty drastically during that first semester of that. And then the IEP meetings started getting a lot better. I started getting more parent involvement in the IEP meeting. So look at chapter 3, read it, take it to heart, and then part of the discussion board I'll talk about a little bit later will be on chapter 3. So read this chapter. Let's see. Also, look at the teacher inserts they had. Any little videos they have in this one, definitely look at that. Um, Look at the part about culturally and linguistic diverse society. This also is an area that you definitely need to utilize. I had a student at my high school that spoke pretty fluent Spanish and English, and when we had IEP meetings, the parents, I noticed really quickly, they did not speak very good English, and they basically looked to the daughter to get information. And when I started looking at this a little bit further, realized that the following year we had a counselor come in that spoke fluent Spanish. So what better way to find a staff member that speaks that language? And I saw a big change in how the parents felt about the IEP when they realized that I felt good enough and strongly enough about them to bring in an interpreter when needed. And the IEP meetings were 100% better after that. So really take a look at this linguistic and diverse and culturally diverse society that's in there too. Then after you finish the quiz, move on to Chapter 12 on deafness and hearing loss. I think this provide some of the most discussion of any of the chapters in the book, because we all have our perceptions of deafness. But after you read the chapter, and then when I do have you do the listen to the story from NPR, and make sure that you read the deafness pages, when you get in that discussion board, I see a lot of changes in attitude. So make sure that you're doing everything you can to look at that, and then make sure you put enough information to me to get your perspective and to give points on this part of the assignment. Sometimes students forget, I can't see what you're doing, I can only read what you're doing. So make sure that you're being explanatory enough in there to give me what you need. And then after you give your thoughts, respond respectfully to your peers. Remember to look at the rubric. I'm really trying. I think the rubric is a better way of me grading, a more fair way of me grading than I have in the past. So I'm going to be using that rubric a little bit more. And I know these 2 weeks, like I said to some of you, your grades last week, I realize that, I'm kind of suggesting you get chapter, the first chapter done by Thursday, getting it in there, and then starting on the second chapter. But also on this, I'm expecting you to at least go back in a day or two and look at that first post. Look at some of the other people's posts and then post some more. I'm really not looking for a one-day wham bam here I'm done type deal. I'm looking for those to go back at least a day and later and look at some of the other posts that have been posted and get some perspective, because that is where you're going to get it. We're not a face-to-face class, and many of these perspectives of other students you would get in the regular classroom because you're face-to-face. So by going back throughout the week and looking at these other perspectives and commenting on theirs, whether you like them or not, commenting on those gives a lot better viewpoint to the other students in your class of their perspective, and also a good perspective of you. On this one, make sure that on 12, I want you to respond respectfully to at least one point of view that you disagree with. Yes, you heard me right. I want you to respond to one that you disagree with. So make sure after you post your comments, come back in a day or two and look at the others and look for one that you disagree with, and then respectfully post on there why you disagree and give some ideas. Great job for most of you this past week in getting things and scheduling things in. Make sure and get with me. If you do have vacations, if you do have family things that come up or internet things that come up, email me. I don't know unless you tell me. And just like if you were a face-to-face person coming up, you would typically come up, hey, I'm sorry I missed class yesterday. I had the flu. Or I'm sorry I missed class yesterday. We had a family emergency. I realize those things happen, and I can't give you ideas or maybe come to your aid if you don't tell me. So let me know when things come up, and there might be some things that we can work out together on an individual basis. Okay, technology item this week. This week's technology is actually related to your discussion board for Chapter 3. What I want you to do is go to transitioncoalition.org's website. It's a great website that I've used for several years. It has many different modules. There are some school districts that actually use transitioncoalition.org's modules as a teacher in service. So what I want you to do is you're going to go on the site. It's free. Create a free login. Make sure and save it. That's why this morning I had to get my password sent to me again. So make sure and save it. Then take the time to bookmark this site and then go in and do the module that I asked you to do. And then get on and post. Now this module may take a little bit, so I will look and see how you all are doing throughout this week. I realize it's a 2-chapter week, and I'll look at it throughout the week to see how you're doing. So bear with me on this week, but definitely do the module, and then when you get done with the module, come in and do the post. Next week we'll be going over Chapter 4 on intellectual disabilities, and a little bit on your lesson plan. We'll talk about that. I am getting some of the things done a little bit early, like last week. About by Wednesday or Thursday I had the test gone through and I updated the rest of it. So remember, if they turn blue, you can go in and do some of the items. Now the quizzes will not open up when they need to, early, but you can get started on the rest of it early if you need to. Let's see here. Then another thing you might want to look at when you get done with the chapters this week is make sure that you have your ideas put together for your interview. Make sure and look at the rubric. I'll discuss more about this next week, but there is a rubric for this interview. If you have questions about, you've got an idea of who you might want to interview, then email me those and I will get back to you on those. Again, I want to end by saying great job. As a student, you all have done great. You all have, many of you, done things early, and I can see your all's hard work. So bear with me. We're going to get through this together. But I want you to have a great week. If you have questions, email me, get in contact with me, and we'll work through those questions. Again, week 3's video, and I will let you go. Y'all have a great week.